people also don't have adequate information on the topic relating to climate change. And that's why some still believe it's a hoax because they haven't experienced. Someone from an African continent that has been prone to these changes will tell you climate is real. But someone from the European continent, someone who has not experienced, drought, someone who has not experienced what it means to walk 20 kilometers to get a 20-liter jerrycan of water, they'll tell you climate change is not real because they have not experienced. And therefore, this conversation is also based on where are you having this conversation from? I would say that youths are no longer the leaders of the future, they're the leaders of today. And with the right support, the right systems, the right infrastructure, the youths have the potential to provide solutions to the already undermining problems in the society. I would say that they have the huge potential and they need support. Yeah.
Hello to our viewers, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Once again, this is the Evolving Professional hosted by CM Academy. Here is where we bring you professionals from different fields to talk about their career journey and, of course, to inspire us along the way. Today on set, I'm very pleased to have Kelvin Muli, who is the founder and chief executive officer of the Pan-African Network for Climate Action. He leads efforts on natural resource management, landscape restoration, wetland conservation, wildlife management, and sustainable agriculture. I am pleased to welcome him. He'll be taking us through the effects of climate change and climate action. And as a youth, a leader in this space, join me in welcoming him. Kelvin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for that introduction.
Yes, so I'm also joined, or here on the set, we also have Stella Orengo, who is also a resident expert. Stella, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Susan, and welcome, Kelvin.
Yeah, so we'll start by just wanting to understand where this began. Where is this passion from, and what has been your career journey like in this climate space?
Thank you, Susan. My journey has been very interesting, both the personal and also professional journey. Coming from an arid and semi-arid county, I've been able to witness first-hand exposure to climate change and the impacts. I've also been able to work with communities in these arid and semi-arid areas. For instance, Samburu, Turkana, and I've been able to see women walking 15 kilometers to and from just to get a 20-liter jerrycan of water. I've also seen rivers drying. I've seen the impacts of droughts, kids going to school without food, families sleeping hungry without food. And what this did is that it gave me the first human dimension of climate change. And even if you look at the African, or rather let's just even focus on Kenyan context, 80% of Kenyan landmass is arid and semi-arid area. And this region hosts over 12 million Kenyans, or between 12 to 15 million Kenyans, showing you how severe climate change does to our people. And if I take you back again, in 2022, we witnessed one of the most severe droughts in the African continent, the 2022 the Horn of Africa drought that affected about 16 million, 16 to even that 6 million people across Kenya, Somalia, and Ethiopia. And this was one of the most devastating impacts of climate change, where we saw a lot of people being affected. And this has never happened in this 21st century. So that really pushed me to take a step into the climate space, just to be able to see how we can be able to mitigate those impacts, how we can be able to ensure that the communities are empowered to adopt to climate resilience. And the journey has been very interesting because we've seen a lot of challenges on the way. But what I can tell you today is that there's a solution to those challenges, and that's why I'm here to have this conversation with you.
Thank you, Kelvin, and we are very pleased to have you here. And of course, as a young person, speaking very passionately about the issues of climate change, and also mentioning about the indigenous community and the adverse effects that climate change has. What would you say to a person who says climate change action and climate change really is a hoax?
Thank you. That has been a conversation that many people have been very uncomfortable to have or rather engage. And it also takes us back to how you've brought up, or rather the context of your upbringing. And climate change is real. We've seen it unfold in our eyes and in our presence, and we've seen the impact. We've seen floods happening. Even here in Nairobi, we've seen the past 2 weeks people dying because of floods. That's as a result of climate change. But the context of understanding if climate change is real or not is based on also human action. I'll give an example. People, when we were growing up, we had a very good ecosystem, biodiversity rich ecosystem. We had trees, we had a lot of birds jumping. But now people have cut down the trees for charcoals, for housing, for source of energy as firewood. And what that has done, it has contributed to climate change. Trees are carbon sinks. They absorb carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is one of the greenhouse gases. I just try to explain in a very simple way because climate change happens in this scenario where we have the greenhouse effect, where the greenhouse gases are tapped into the atmosphere and they form a sort of blanket or rather a coating that traps heat from escaping to the atmosphere. And now, as a result of that, we're having very high intense heats that are melting ice, our mountain glaciers, and also causing other devastating effects. We have extreme heats. Before the rains, again, we had very extreme heats. This is climate change. But people also don't have adequate information on the topic relating to climate change. And that's why some still believe it's a hoax because they haven't experienced. Someone from an African continent that has been prone to these changes will tell you climate is real. But someone from the European continent, someone who has not experienced, drought, someone who has not experienced what it means to walk 20 kilometers to get a 20-liter jerrycan of water, they'll tell you climate change is not real because they have not experienced. And therefore, this conversation is also based on where are you having this conversation from? Because if you, from the African continent, you'll absolutely agree that climate change is real. But if you have this conversation with people from other continents that have not experienced this kind of phenomenon, they'll tell you climate change is a hoax. And therefore, we need now to bring all these people on a single setting and have this conversation so that we need to understand what are they talking from, and also trying to show them the real impacts of climate change. But for me, I'll tell you climate change is real.
Very interesting.
Okay. Thank you, Kelvin. We've shared, we were having a discussion with Susan about the climate deniers, and so you shed light on that. Back to the issue of your journey into climate action. I know me and you met on the eve of our graduation, but we would like to know, because most of our listeners are maybe students getting into professions or young professionals or even professionals, just give us a glimpse of your professional journey and how it ties into climate action space.
Yes, my professional journey has been good. And how I found myself into the climate space is through my personal experiences that I had. And also seeing at first hand through community engagement, through research work, going to these interiors, communities, and seeing how they've been impacted. So that triggered my passion to venture into climate space. And I thought I needed to get into a space where I understand all these dynamics. So that's why I did my first degree, bachelor's degree in natural resource management, just to understand, the context of, talking about the trees, talking about the waters, talking about all these natural resources. Then after that, I still felt I wasn't satisfied. I took my first master's degree in limnology, which is a study of water systems, looking at the lakes, rivers, streams, just to understand how do they how do they work, or rather how do they function, and how are they affected, how do they support the livelihoods of the people. Still, after doing my first master's, I felt again, I saw women and children being affected a lot by climate change. Young girls dropping out of school to go and fetch water for the family, women also facing a lot of challenges, being also prone to other issues like waking up very early in the morning at 5 a.m. to go fetch water, or firewood, and they're exposed even to gender-based violence like rape cases, even murder cases. And therefore, I felt I needed to understand the relationship between climate change and gender. Therefore, I took my second master's degree to look at the aspect of women, children, and also nature rights and environmental governance. And over that, now having that educational background has given me the power to be able to, even influence policies both at national and also international level. Because one thing I'll advise the young people, the graduates, is you need to be backed up by knowledge. Because the climate space, you need to influence policies, but now you need to have that backup knowledge, because climate advocacy, or that these climate space conversations, you can't go into this conversation without the knowledge of what's happening. So after having now that backup of knowledge, I tapped into the climate space, and I was very challenged, especially when I was coming to the space, because my first engagement was actually at the international level. And when I walked into that space, I saw young people from the European countries, from these different countries. They understand the context of these discussions. Therefore, it gives me a push to continue even learning on how the systems works. How do you shape the narrative in this conversation? How do you come on board and also support ideas, support the drafting of these concepts? So that really challenged me, and it has shaped even my current professional life, because from that I'm now able to even engage with policymakers. I'm able to engage with the implementers and other stakeholders in this climate space, and therefore encourage the young people, get knowledge first, because that's a fundamental thing that you need to do. With now the knowledge, now get to the space.
Thank you, Kevin, for always, of course, reminding us how knowledge is important in this struggle or acclamation for climate change. I'd also ask you another follow-up question. I don't know if you've had this discussion that because the youth are the more impacted, because of course how we are going to be more impacted by climate change is because we are here for a longer period of time. We will be here, of course, the anticipation for a longer period of time than maybe the older generations who might not have that much time. So the youth should really be actively engaged in this climate space. Recently, we've seen Trufena Muthoni, who's come up into this space of championing for indigenous community. She's championed for she's been a climate activist of some sort. What do you think also the youth, in terms of the impact, the meaningful impact, full change that they bring into this space? What is it? What is it that the youth also bring to this space?
Thank you for that question. I love having this conversation around youths, because even according to UNDP, you see youths even globally make up to 50% of the population. And when you come even to Africa, we're having youths actually below 25 years, being 60%, which makes African continent actually the youngest continent. And therefore, youths have a role to play in this space. And the youths having the advantage of numbers, it puts us at advantage to actually be able to contribute and shape the narrative around the climate space. But what I always advise young people is that let's shift this conversation from activism to advocacy. Because activism, what it does in the long term, it makes people push you back from having this conversation. It's perceived as hooliganism You wake up in the morning, I don't like what your ideas. The next morning, you see me in the street with the placards saying, Susan must go, Susan should leave the office. But advocacy, it's now, I don't like Susan's way of doing things. I can invite her to have a conversation and tell her you're not doing this the right way. How can we correct that? That's advocacy. And therefore, it's the thing that I want to urge the youth to shift to that, because you'll help shape policies, will be able to dictate the conversations when you're doing the advocacy way. Youths have many opportunities to be able to do that. Number one, we need to have the youths at the decision-making tables. Because for the longest time, we've seen conversations around youths, but the same youths are not in the decision-making table. So we need to bring them on board. We need to engage them at policy, development, policy implementation, so that now they understand the whole process of how it's done about. Again, we need to ensure that there's something called the climate fund. Because we have great people, like you said, Trufena, she's doing an amazing job, pushing and advocating for climate justice. But there's not enough funding to support the initiatives. Okay. Actually, according to UNDP, only 2% of the global climate fund is accessible to youths, which is still very little to be able to implement the already existing innovative solution by the youths, and also upscale, rather, implement the new ideas and new concepts. So that climate fund is still not adequate, and therefore that's why we are appealing to have more climate fund accessible to youths who have these innovatives, who have these ideas to be able to implement them. And then lastly, there's need to do capacity building for youth. That is very, very important, because as much as we want to have youth in this space, we need to have them knowledgeable. Because the climate space is kind of technical. It's not just about saying climate change. It's our whole system. It's our system of how do we influence these policies, how do we implement these policies, how do we engage in this conversation, because we have so many climate spaces. For instance, we have the Conference of Parties, which is the COPs, which is a global climate space. And we see a lot of young people going to these spaces, but if you ask them what are they doing at those spaces, they can't really tell you, because there's no prior capacity building on these youths on how, because these spaces are very technical. You meet people who have been in this space for many years, they understand their system. And so as young people, as we still demand in this space, we need to have proper training, we need to be well capacitated to be able to engage in this conversation and also influence decision making.
Thank you, Kelvin. You brought out very pertinent points, especially on the involvement of the youth and them having the knowledge and even the technical capacity to engage. Now, some of us are aware that you have been nominated, or you're one of the nominees for Top 40 Under 40. Could you just shed light if that nomination is on the account of the work you've been doing around climate action, and just so that our viewers can get to understand what that is about?
Yeah, thank you, Stella, for that question. Yes, I'm privileged to have been nominated for the Top 40 Under 40, organized by the Global Masterminds, just to be able to recognize the role young leaders are doing in the climate space. And it's an honor, because I've been doing a lot of work. I've been doing a lot of advocacy and capacity building in this space. I am the CEO of the Pan-African Network for Climate Action, which is now the largest youth network actually in Africa. Right now, we're working with youths across Africa, not just Kenya. And we have a network of more than 500 youths. And through this network, we've capacitated the youths. I've talked about capacity building. We're doing trainings to be able to, give knowledge to youths about climate knowledge, also about how to do policy, how to engage in this conversation. And therefore, being nominated for me, I feel finally someone has recognized the role that youths are playing, because we've supported a lot of youths.
Okay.
We've also supported, like last year, we supported youths across Africa to attend the SP62 in Germany. And that is one of the testimonies that we show, because we talk about giving youth opportunities, and as a Pan-African Network for Climate Action, we've done that, where we brought youths from across Africa, capacitated them, and given now a space to go and put into action what they've been learning. And therefore, I feel honored and also privileged for that nomination. And I'm really looking forward to the award ceremony and the recognition. Yeah.
I will also congratulate you for that nomination, Kelvin, and
you.
of course keep up the good work. And also bring just a follow-up question, just to say that you are also sitting as a board member, as one of the board of directors of 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Foundations, which champions the intersection between climate action and gender equity. What, as a youth, what perspectives that might be different from maybe how an older person might be viewing climate change and climate action? What perspective are you bringing to this board that is different from, or that is other than from a person who might be older, or a person who might be from an older generation?
I always say the difference between a young person and an older person is that an older person was once young, and a young person has not been old. And therefore, being a board of director at 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Foundation, which is also an organization that's really championing for gender inclusion in the climate space. And for the longest time, the conversation about women in the climate space has been neglected. And therefore, what 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Foundation is doing is bringing these conversations up and ensuring that women are part of our cell of this conversation. For instance, in my organization, the Pan-African Network for Climate Action, 70% of the staff are women. Because we want now to bridge that gap that has been there before, women in the space. And it's really taking shape, because we're seeing a lot of women also coming on board and engaging in this conversation. And regarding how we also nurture young, upcoming youths in the space, especially the gender and climate space, is that we giving them an opportunity to come and share their stories. Because we need to give women an opportunity to tell us their story, because you cannot tell a story on behalf of someone. And therefore, through the works that we do, is that women are coming up and sharing their experiences, sharing their story, sharing their narratives. And through that now experience, we're now able to see how to incorporate the gender into the climate space. And that's been a good journey, because we've had a lot of good stories. We've seen a lot of issues coming up. And last time we did a research in Samburu on how climate change is impacting the women. And it was very devastating, things coming up, emerging that were hidden and people didn't know. I'll give an example. During that research, we realized that a lot of young girls are forced into marriages, because these are pastoral communities. And the pride of these pastoral communities is the cattle. And now, because of climate change, there's drought. And the men in the household, they've lost the livestock. And how do they get now this livestock? They have to force these young girls to get married so that they can receive the livestock. And you see now you're bringing the issue of gender as a result of climate change. And now that's the conversation we're trying to bring up to be able to showcase how climate is really affecting the women in the society. Yeah.
Very sad story from Samburu. And it reminds me of a story we also had about, for the longest time, we would talk about polygamy in those pastoral communities, only to come and discover that it's actually an adaptation method, so that you have one wife on this side of Kenya and another one on the border, yeah? So when it's dry here, the man moves with the cattle. So Kelvin, maybe we'll invite you again next time to come and talk to us about some of the things we look at and say, this is not acceptable yet. It's an adaptive mechanism towards climate change. But next question for me is, you have been involved a lot in the regional and international spaces doing advocacy. If young people wanted to get into that space, as you said, you need a lot of technical know-how. How can they navigate that? And I ask that because I've seen young people at times complain that they're not able even to get funding to go into those forums, and they can't even be given a table at that space. The most you're given is maybe to rapporteur. So what are some of the things they can do to be at the decision-making table? Yes.
Thank you, Stella. I would say I will start by saying the biggest challenge, the reason why youth are not given the space is because they lack the fundamental understanding of these spaces. And it's true, I've been there. And I don't want to lie. And I always say for us, the youth, to influence policies, we must understand. Because there's a game of width. You need to be knowledgeable. And that's what I always challenge my fellow youth, is that for us to take up these spaces, these decision-making tables, we need to back them up with information and knowledge. Because when you go to these international climate forums, they want someone who understands what's happening there. Because these are high-level technical forums, and they need to be knowledgeable. Then the other approach that youth needs to do is you need to form coalition, because this is a space that you cannot tackle alone. This is a big space, so you need coalition, you need partnerships, you need to be into networks of other young people around the continent, around the world, that are doing the same thing you're doing. Because now, when you come together as a group or rather as a team, you have more, I would say, bargaining power when it comes to now demanding for these spaces. So when you walk there alone, it's very hard also for you to be able to demand for those spaces. But now when you come out in numbers, these people will now see that indeed these people demand for this space, and they will invite you for those discussions. Again, is that we need to have institutionalized frameworks specifically designed to have youth inclusion. For example, yes, we do have a focal point at the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. Yes, we do. But we also want to challenge the ministry to create a framework where young people are engaged even at the national level before they go to international level. So that when we go out there, they're already backed up by the national government, because that has been the biggest challenge. I had an opportunity last year to attend the 2025 Global NDC Conference, which is the Nationally Determined Contributions Conference that happens in Berlin. I was very shocked, because in Kenya, I was the only Kenyan youth that attended that conference. And when I got there, I met government officials there. I was shocked. This is a forum that youth need. And the organization that took me there actually was GIZ, based in Germany, and UNDP. And I kept asking myself so many questions. Why can't the government, institutionalize these spaces? Because we have youths in Kenya. We don't have any shortage of youth leaders in Kenya in the climate space. But we need to have a system that really create a space for these young people to engage. Because even like the case of, you remember the case of Trufena Muthoni not being given access to, to attend the COP30 in Brazil last year. It's because we don't have these institutionalized spaces. Because as a ministry, you need to have this space where you bring together, even before COPs happens, or rather these international conferences happen, mobilize youth, because we're not short of youth leaders. Actually, Kenya is one of the leading countries in the world that has very vigorous and very aggressive youth leaders in this climate space. Bring them together, and now from there you have a whole team, that even when they go out there, they're able to push for Kenyan reforms and also youth agenda. So that has been the biggest challenge, and it's a challenge you pose into the ministry to be able to create institutional frameworks to be able to absorb all these young leaders, and then now see how you can be able to mentor them to get into the international climate space.
I also, Kelvin, what I would ask, because from this discussion, we are learning that the youth might have certain challenges when it comes to meaningful impact on youth advocacy. And of course, these challenges are financial in terms of they may not have enough funding, and also they may not have technical expertise that is needed to meaningfully engage in these spaces. But I'd also want to pivot a little and ask and pose the question, what is it that the youth have in terms of what are their advantages? Some would argue that, for instance, the youth are very savvy when it comes to how they engage on social media and how they use social media to impact meaningful change. How does social media play a role in impacting meaningful change, and that change specifically for this discussion, climate change and climate action?
Yeah, thank you. The digital space is a forum that has a huge potential actually to influence this kind of discussion. Remember, we talked about youths forming like 60% of the African population, and where the youth right now, they're on social media. So even when you want to really get the attention of the young people, or the youth, the digital space. And we've seen also the digital space playing a very big role in shaping this conversation, because young people are already there. You're not looking for them. They're already there. It's only now for you as a government or an entity to try and form a system, or rather an approach where to get to now bring them on board. I'll give an example. Look like for the case of the Fridays for the Future, which is a global organization that has really maximized on digital presence. They've been able to mobilize youth from across 150 countries around the world, engaging them in this climate space, having conversation with them, training them, and even supporting them. And the same thing is happening even in Kenya, even in our organization. We utilize a lot of digital space because we're based in Kenya, but we have presence in over 27 countries across the continent. And we now utilize the digital space. We engage the people, the youth on X. They turn up in numbers, because they are hungry for information, they're hungry for mentorship and support. We engage them on other forums, Zoom meetings, just to be able to capacitate them. So the digital space has a very huge potential in shaping the youth perspective and also supporting them. And what we look up to now is how do we utilize that space to be able to have meaningful change in the society. And the best thing to do that is create forums for youth to engage. That is all what I will say, because through these forums now, you are able to tap these youths, you're able to engage them, because majority of them, I would say, they're idle, because they are not being invited to these spaces. And therefore, creating these forums, creating these spaces for them to engage is very, very important. And the digital space is the way to go.
Kelvin, thank you for saying that that is what the youth are bringing. Sometime last year, our firm actually organized a side event at the African Climate Summit week 2 in Addis. And our theme was, as is the Global South, looking inwards towards financing our climate action and not always extending our hands to the global north to borrow. And it will be interesting now that you've spoken about the youth, and I'm looking at them as a resource. And maybe just because you work with them a lot in this space, shed some light on one of the programs that you have done with youth that you'd want to be, the way you say your legacy. Yes, so shed some light on one of the programs around climate action that is your legacy project.
Thank you, Stella, for that question. Yes, we have so many programs, but I will highlight one. We have what we call the capacity building for youth in the Global South program, which is a continental program that's shaping the narratives of the youth and also being able to capacitate them. So far, we've been able to train more than 150 youths across Africa. And the most encouraging thing is that these youths, even after the trainings, they are doing impactful work in the society. We're already seeing impact. Last year alone, we did trainings, a lot of trainings to youth, and we saw youth taking up these spaces, like now international climate spaces. When I went to SB62, I met the youth we trained, even holding side events and really being vocal on those stages. So our legacy as Pan-African Network for Climate Action is ensuring that we change the narrative, the African narrative, that youths cannot be meaningful. And we've changed that conversation because our youths now are rising up. Our youths are now taking up the space. We're now seeing youth leaders actually from our network. And that change of narrative for me will be a legacy for us for the longest time.
I think, Kevin, you had such an impactful discussion, and we've touched around very many issues, and chief among them is how do the youth tap into the global conversation that is climate change and climate action and youth advocacy when it comes to these issues. What would be your parting shot now as we close up and wrap up this segment to the youth, to the institutions, of course, that should be supporting the youth and giving them funding? What would be your overall parting shot to end or to wrap up this conversation?
I would say that youths are no longer the leaders of the future. They're the leaders of today. And with the right support, the right systems, the right infrastructure, the youths have the potential to provide solutions to the already undermining problems in the society. I would say that they have the huge potential and they need support. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We know that you have been very gracious to actually sponsor this episode, and we are grateful, and we hope that we can have more and more engagements.
To our viewers, we have had the absolute pleasure to speak to Kelvin Muli, CEO, founder of the Pan-African Network for Climate Action. I hope you've enjoyed this segment. I hope you've learned a lot on climate change. I hope as a youth watching us, you've learned on how you would tap in to take up this space and to take up advocacy and to drive meaningful change. Thank you. I've been your host, Susan Mwango.